Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Julie McCrossin, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is a special Wolper Wellbeing Forum hosted by Wolper Jewish Hospital and Friends of Wolper, and our partner for this webinar is the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies. And it really is my honour to host this discussion this evening. Our topic is how to protect our mental health during this time of trauma, grief and anxiety, practical strategies to help us cope. And our focus tonight is going to be exclusively on mental health and well-being, and our focus is on adults. And we'll tell you later about a second part to this series, which will be looking at the needs of children and adolescents. Now, some of the questions we've received go to broader topics to do with the war in Israel and associated issues to do with anti-Semitism, both in Australia and beyond. And we will give you details later of a New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies webinar that is on tomorrow night, where the President, David Ossip, will be speaking and others, but we'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But let me begin our webinar this evening by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we're broadcasting on tonight, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and on your behalf to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. And if you're joining us tonight for the first time, just a few quick words on Wolper Jewish Hospital. It provides rehabilitation, medical and palliative care to everyone in our community within a framework of Jewish values and religious and dietary requirements. Well, before we begin tonight and you meet our panel, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Ruth Guth, the Community Partnership Officer at Wolper Jewish Hospital. Welcome to you, Ruth.
Thank you, Julie. I think that it's very appropriate at this time that we say a special prayer for the hostages and the IDF, because what we do spiritually has an effect on everybody in the whole world, and especially in Israel. And so for every mitzvah we do, it helps them. All the soldiers in Israel, most of them are now wearing tefillin because they realize that by doing this, miracles happen. So by saying prayers, it helps miracles happen. And lots of miracles have happened in Gaza already. So by saying this prayer, I would like to think that we here have helped our soldiers and our hostages with their health and their well-being and their safety. I'm going to read a psalm from Tehillim, which is the book of Psalms. And if you have a book like this, then you can read it too. And it doesn't have to be a specific psalm. There are so many psalms in the book of Tehillim that that you can read. The one I've chosen to read is Psalm 20, and I'm going to read it in Hebrew, our holy language, and then in English. Lamanatseach mizmor leDavid. Yancha Adonai b'yom tzara yisagevha, Shem Elahei Yaakov. Yishlach ezracha mekodesh umitzion yisadecha. Yizkor kol minchoteha v'yolatacha yadashne selah. Yiten lacha chilvavecha v'chol atzatacha yamale. Nuranana b'shuateha uv'shem Eloheinu nitgol yamale yakol mishalotecha. Adonai kol mishalotecha. Ata yadati ki hoshea Adonai Mashiach yanehu mishmei kodsho bigvurot yesha mino yamino. Ele varechev ve'ele vasusim v'anachnu b'shem Adonai Eloheinu naskir. Hema karu v'nafalu v'anachnu kamanu v'nitodad. Adonai Hoshea hamelech yanenu v'yom karenu. For the conductor, a song of David. May the Lord answer you on a day of distress. May the name of the God of Jacob fortify you. May he send your aid from his sanctuary, and may he support you from Zion. May he remember all your meal offerings, and may he accept your fat burnt offerings forever. May he give you as your heart desires, and may he fulfill all your counsel. Let us sing praises for your salvation, and let us assemble in the name of God. May the Lord fulfill all your requests. Now I know that the Lord saved his anointed. He answered him from his holy heavens with the mighty acts of salvation from his right hand. These trust in chariots and these in horses, but we mentioned the name of the Lord our God. They kneel and fall, but we rise and gain strength. Lord, save us. May the King answer us on the day we call. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And if you've just joined us, welcome. Ruth Guth works on community partnerships at Wolper Jewish Hospital and was acknowledging the events, the war in Gaza and in Israel, and saying a prayer. And may I also, as a non-Jewish woman, express my horror and distress at the appalling events of October 7th and the taking of the hostages. As I said at our earlier webinar shortly after these events, it was a 21st century pogrom and a complete abomination. And I know that many of you watching tonight will know people who were brutally killed and violated. You'll know people who were taken hostage or who are fighting right now in Gaza. And I just wanted to say that I have had the opportunity to visit Israel on 3 occasions, twice with the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies. And I believe, apart from my relationship, a close relationship with Jewish people here in Australia, I think those visits to Israel have deepened my empathy and given me a little bit more insight into the trauma that many of you will be feeling, and hence you've rung in and watching us this evening. And I just want you to know that our panel and everyone are going to be working very hard this evening to offer you some sort of strategies to cope with this really extraordinary and difficult time. So one more person to welcome before I invite the panel to the screen. And it really is my pleasure to now introduce Richard Glass. He's the president of Wolper Jewish Hospital and the vice president of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, who are our partner organisation tonight. Welcome to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Julie. Look, good evening, everyone. And I, along with David Ossip, the president of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, welcome you and thank you very much for joining us this evening. The current war in Israel and Gaza has given rise to very real concerns for our friends and our family in Israel, and indeed for Israel herself. We've seen a significant increase in activism and anti-Semitism around the world, and of course Australia has not been excluded from that. This has understandably given rise to many in our community experiencing an overwhelming and perhaps unprecedented range of emotions. And that's not been helped by the media tsunami broadcasting these often horrific events into our homes and workplaces 24/7. During this time of uncertainty, it is so important that we take care of our mental health for the sake of ourselves, our loved ones, and those in our care. We must not only support Israel, but we must support each other. For that reason, Wolper and the Board of Deputies are providing 2 very different webinars to support the community during this unsettling time. Our webinar this evening focuses on providing guidance and resources for adults to better self-care and to support other adults. The second webinar will provide guidance to adults on how best to care for children and adolescents, and will also be focusing on Year 12 students who may have some hesitancy about entering our university campuses should the current circumstances prevail when they start into their first year of university. I do also want to emphasise that these webinars, as Julie said earlier, are limited to mental health issues, not the broader issues related to the war in Israel. However, should you be interested, the Board of Deputies is holding a communal briefing by Zoom tomorrow evening at 7 p.m, which will include 2 editors of the Jerusalem Post talking directly to us and a community update from our President, David Ossip. There is also a very informative portal on the Board of Deputies website called Israel at War, which I recommend to you. And there is a similar but different resource on the UIA website as well. So again, thank you very much for joining us. And I'll now leave you in the very capable hands of Julie McCrossin.
Thank you so much, Richard. And I will just tell you a little bit about the website in case you're not familiar with it, with those resources that Richard just mentioned, where you can find them. And I will repeat them at the end of the evening. And remember, this is being filmed, so you'll be able to see it on the Wolper website. But the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies web address is www.newsouthwalesjbd.org.au. Just remember that, .org.au. And there you can see the Israel at War resources and information. You can sign up for a regular newsletter that gives you updates. There's connecting numbers to counselling for community members with Jewish Care and Jewish House. And there's also a series of forums in people's homes that Linda Ben-Manesha, whom many of you will know from the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, is organising, called Talking About Israel, the aim of which is to embrace and empower. And evidently there's a very large number of them happening where people invite their Jewish, and you can invite your non-Jewish friends into the home for briefings. So I'll just give you that information again at the very end. I know some of people are thinking, how can I make a positive contribution in a manner that is safe? And I think that website is a great source of that. Very quick housekeeping. Your questions are welcome. Thank you to all of you who've sent some in advance. You can put them right now in the Q&A and throughout our evening. The only way we can get your questions is through the Q&A now. We can't see or hear you. Our question monitor is experienced general practitioner, Dr. Lena Safro, and she's monitoring them, and I will come to her regularly during our evening before I finish just before 9 p.m. And all questions will be asked anonymously. We'll answer as many as we can. We try to get through as many as we can. We cannot, of course, give individual medical advice. We urge you to see your general practitioner for any follow-up professional support that you would like to have. And again, the reminder that this is being filmed and it will be on the Wolper Jewish Hospital website shortly after broadcast. So now I'll invite our behind-the-scenes technical man, Nat, to please welcome onto the screen Dr. Karen Spielman, a GP specialising in mental health, Des Kahn, a psychotherapist currently in private practice, and Dr. Danielle Einstein, a clinical psychologist and author and researcher. And I will give you more information about each of them as I bring people in. I'd like to come, if I may, to Dr. Karen Spielman first, our GP specialising in mental health. And Karen, I know you're active in education, research, peer support around mental health for other general practitioners, a fellow of the General Practitioners College, of course, but also of the Australian Society for Psychological Medicine. So welcome. And this is deaf sign clapping, and I encourage all our presenters tonight to show their enthusiasm with this enthusiasm and warmth and support. Look, we're offering people information about how to protect themselves during this time of trauma, grief, and anxiety. Just before I start asking you about the skills to be okay, which I think you believe our community has, this is a uniquely distressing time, though, in our lifetime. Would you agree? Just how serious is this in terms of a cause of distress?
Julie, it's a difficult one. I think it is quite unique, and it's layer upon layer, isn't it? So we've been through such difficult times as a community recently, internationally with the COVID pandemic, and that's touched many of us really deeply in a really very real ways. So we know what it's like to be distressed, and this is another whole level where it's almost it's a similar thing, but we're experiencing it in a different way to the rest of the community, and I think that makes it much harder, and it feels like a real existential threat in a very, very different way to what we have.
And when you say an existential threat, do you mean to the state of Israel, but also focus tonight the individual emotional well-being of Jewish people and their allies?
Absolutely. I feel that personally, and I know many of my friends and colleagues do. And that is a challenge because we are getting it on so many different levels. So from a GP point of view, what I'm understanding is how people are feeling that in a very physical way as well as an emotional way.
Could you give me some examples of how we may experience distress physically as well as emotionally?
Sure. Well, as in my work, I see a lot of undifferentiated distress. So we very much see people whose the stress is impacting them physically as well as emotionally. And by that, I mean they might have physical symptoms like headaches or sleeplessness or poor appetite. One of the things that I think we're all seeing at the moment is reduced immunity. So we're actually, more exposed, more vulnerable to the things that we're exposed to as well. So there's a whole sort of 360-degree experience of what we're going through.
My understanding, Karen, is that you believe the Jewish community has the skills they need to get through this. Can you explain why you have that faith and what sort of skills you're talking about?
Absolutely. Well, we are such a strong community and we are so connected, and social connection and individual connection is how we get through distress. We know how to do that as a community. We reach out to each other in our personal relationships, in our, in layer upon layer of relationships, families, society, school, synagogues, community, and that's actually through connection that we feel that we're not alone, and that soothes our system. So we're able to bring ourselves down from that distress by connecting with others and regulating each other in a sense of feeling the strength from the community. And we all go through it in different patterns and different times. So we because we've got that connection, we can hold each other. When someone's down, someone's up, and it's really important to have that reaching out for each other.
And you believe, like, one key message, if people remember nothing else tonight, it's reach out for help.
Absolutely.
So when should you do that, and how should you do that?
I think if you even slightly think that it's even if you half think that it's a possibility to reach out for help. But one of the things that I've really taught a lot of my patients over the last few years is how to recognize that distress in their bodies. So like I mentioned before, Julie, things like not sleeping or having headaches or poor appetite, feeling muscle tension. These are all, rapid heart rate, shortness of breath, anything that makes you feel unwell in a physical sense is a sign that perhaps you're not managing as well as you could be, and maybe your reactions aren't as regulated as you'd like. And that's the way to start recognizing in yourself that might be a time to reach out for help. And we'll all have different people in our circles that we can speak with.
And I'll come back to you as the evening goes on and get more suggestions about how to achieve that sort of self-regulation. But just before we leave this sense of the physical reactions to this kind of trauma, because I'm very aware too there's intergenerational trauma.
Absolutely.
May I ask you to speak to that first? What does that mean, and how may it be catching some Jewish people off guard?
Oh, I think that we breathe this in, don't we, in our lives, and we all know our stories from Pesach, and that in each and every generation people will rise up to destroy us. We know that in our blood. It's written everywhere. I think that's something that we all know. And I have beautiful friends and colleagues who've said to me recently, I didn't realize that I had intergenerational trauma, but I think we all do, and it makes us a little bit more vulnerable. And often with things like grief and trauma, the previous experiences make us a little bit more vulnerable, but it also means that we've got it. We've been through it, and we've come out the other side, and we will keep coming out this other side, and we've each got different skills to help each other. But just be aware that there will be those kinds of triggers that mean that we go straight to feeling hypervigilant, and worrying about safety. We know, excuse me from swearing, we know that shit happens. We know that really deeply. And so we're alert to it, and we're watching out for it, which is how we're built to protect ourselves. So that's okay.
Thank you so much. Dr. Karen Spielman, if you've just joined us, a GP with specialising in mental health, and we'll, of course, be hearing all our panel members again. But let me welcome now Dr. Danielle Einstein, who's a clinical psychologist, author and researcher, an adjunct fellow at Macquarie University, and has key areas of interest and research and publishing and so on in relation to uncertainty and social media. Danielle, I know you believe it's important to understand the cycle of emotion and go deeper, and I will do that with you this evening. But just to begin a little bit more with practical strategies that I know our audience are calling out for. You believe that a core goal for Jewish people at the moment is to outlast this period of uncertainty with powerful distractions. It's such an amazing. So tell us what you mean by a period of uncertainty and why it's happening, and then what you mean by powerful distractions that may help, please.
Julie, when I say that, I guess I think everything that we've been talking about so far and the events that we're watching and what we see in the news is extremely upsetting, and it's because we don't know what's going to happen. And no matter what front we look at, whether it's what's going to happen in Israel, whether it's what's going to happen to individuals who we know in Israel, to the soldiers, the state of Israel, here in Australia, what's going to happen to our children who might be going to university next year? What's going to happen to me when I go to work today? Is anyone going to say anything to me? Am I going to have a discussion about it? There's actually uncertainty and basically worry that we have, that we hold in our head somewhere at the back of our head. Now, many of us are sort of more vaguely aware of it, and we're not very good at actually really looking at what we're worried about in order to answer it, because we also know that it's premature. It's premature to think about whether someone will necessarily talk to me today or what's going to happen to my cousin who's in fighting at the moment, because I do have to wait. I'm not going to know. There's uncertainty. And so what happens is we have a lot of other emotions coming on, and we tend to focus instead on those, and those drive us. And as Karen was saying, we have lots of feelings in our body and it comes out, and we don't like those feelings, so we try to get rid of them. And then that's where it can get us into a little trouble, and we can start to feel really either out of control or very distressed. And so when you now talk about, I know I'll get to the point on practical strategies, I think we have to look at what our healthy coping strategies are. What are the ones that work for us and what are the ones that don't? And we all have to work out, and I'm hoping tonight we'll be able to talk more about that, so that we adjust to only be using the healthy ones which help us outlast the uncertainty. So I can give you a couple, but I can wait for you to ask that.
I was wondering, could you give me just a couple of examples of powerful distractions, just so people 100% know what you mean, and then I'd like to ask you something else.
Each person has to go back to their own experiences. It might be as a teenager, it might be as a young adult. What have they done in the past that has really held their attention and that they've gotten some satisfaction from? And even though they might not feel like doing it at the moment, they still need to get out there and do it, whether it be go for a swim. Really basic things. Get out some crocheting where you end up with some sort of craft, preferably things where there's no device involved, if that's at all possible, so that they're not checking their social media. And then I'd agree with what Karen was saying about having one-on-one discussions with people about how catching up with people and having discussions both about current events and also about other things, both non-Jewish people as well as Jewish people. So there's a couple of,
Look, thank you. And I'll just ask you what, I've got many things to ask you, but one other thing, as you've mentioned non-Jewish people, one of your areas of that you'd like to share with the audience tonight is an encouragement to connect with non-Jewish people and some suggestions about overcoming fears and apprehensions you may have about that. Just some thoughts there on communicating with non-Jewish people, of course, obviously the majority in society.
Well, that's right. Well, I think so. If you understand what happens when we're facing uncertainty and we're in those situations, at the back of our mind, we think the worst. We always think the worst. So if you haven't reached out to someone or they haven't actually reached out to you is mostly what's happening for people in Sydney or in Australia. And so then when someone hasn't reached out to you, you are thinking the worst. You're thinking maybe they're anti-Semitic, or maybe they don't support Israel. And you interpret their silence in the way that is the worst thing possible. Now, that, again, may be happening at the back of your mind, but unfortunately what happens is it drives what you decide to do. So because that's going on in the back of your mind, and it's not surprising that's happening, because everything on the news is showing us a huge amount of anti-Israel sentiment and anti-Semitic actions. And if you are involved in social media at all, you'd be seeing a huge amount of negative stories. And in fact, what happens with the social media is that the more negative stories you see and the more that we share, the negative ones get shared more than the positive.
Yes, you've indicated that particularly on Twitter is the worst of all, that posts by people that stir intense emotion are more likely to be shared, and that's often negative emotion.
Yeah, and even in our own groups, in our own WhatsApp chats where we're being supportive, but still, it's still the negative stories. So it's not surprising that when we're reading that all the time, and if we're on social media all the time because of this need to connect, which Karen was mentioned before, which we think is going to be helpful and which feels in the moment a little bit helpful, but actually when it comes to then the way that we're thinking about the people around us in the street, up the street, at work, we're believing, or we're mistakenly thinking, that everybody is anti-Semitic because we're thinking the worst. So,
and as you said to me when we spoke before this evening, don't overinflate our view of the number of people who are against us based on the media. If I could just speak as a former broadcast journalist on television and radio, there's obviously gross bias and disinformation and misinformation. And if I could recommend the book by Michael Gawenda, a man who was the editor of The Age for some time, but who has had a profound critique of the Australian media, I recommend it to you, Michael Gawenda. But could I just get one more comment from you, and then I just want to meet our third person before I go to our first questions from the audience. As I understand it, your recommendation about social media, one is consider how it makes you feel and make your decisions about how often to use it and how to use it based on that. Is that correct?
Yes, but I think there's a missing bit there, which is that it makes us feel angry often, and anger is an easier emotion. It's more palatable than worry and sadness and disappointment. So in a funny kind of way, there's a little bit of, we feel more in control when we're angry. And anger is a place that many of us, of course, we're going to go to anger. It's one of the first things we go to when we read a terrible story. However, and then the social media will fuel it, make it stronger. And unfortunately, that's not that helpful. I'm not saying we can stop our anger, but I'm saying there are other emotions that we need to pay attention to. And we need to think about how social media actually makes it stronger and distorts our view and stops us doing healthy things that means that we calm ourselves down, and then we can present ourselves in a more calm, careful, considered, strategic way when we're having those discussions with non-Jewish people and with our Jewish friends as well. So we have to be really aware that social media is very tricky, because we might feel better in the moment, but it's actually changing the way that we're seeing the whole situation.
And one of your recommendations is, wherever you can find something positive or encouraging, and if you do use social media, post that, share that. Is that correct?
Yes, but it would be more use social media less. So keep a check on how often. Maybe you only check in once a day or twice a day would be enough, rather than constantly or several times a day or whenever you have your phone. And in line with some of your past presentations, it might be that you actually need to move some social media apps off your phone and onto a different device in your home where it's a bit harder to check it.
That's a great practical suggestion, because it's obviously it's designed to attract us, and it does it too well. Look, thank you so much, Danielle Einstein, and of course I'll be coming back, but let's meet our third panelist, and then we'll go to some questions. And so welcome to Des Kahn, a psychotherapist in private practice now, but who has formerly worked with the grief loss and bereavement service at Jewish Care, and also as a palliative care counsellor at Wolper Jewish Hospital. Welcome to you with my deaf sign clapping. Just before I ask you the first question, any reflections on what you've heard so far that you'd like to reinforce or comment on?
Yeah, something which Karen said with regard. Sorry, I say something which Karen said with regard to having just come through Corona. I think that and because I work with people primarily who are suffering very individual painful losses, that when something like the pandemic happened, people were coming to see me because somebody in their family might have died. They felt themselves sandwiched between the macro and the micro. And I think the same thing is happening again, that the Israel situation is so kind of existentially discombobulating that to deal with that and to deal with their own personal losses and sadness, they really don't know which way to turn. So it looks like everybody's got it in for them. The universe has got it in for them. So it's kind of they're not in limbo because they're actually in hell, and they're getting the flames are coming from the top and the bottom.
That is a very grim image, and yet it rings so true. If I can share something I saw on social media recently that really distressed me, and it was an elderly Jewish man saying, "We said never again, but it's always again." And I felt that he was capturing in that really grief-stricken cry to the universe, a kind of loss of hope that some people are feeling. Is that what you mean by existential discombobulation?
Yes, it's a loss of hope, but it's not necessarily a permanent loss of hope. It's a loss of hope in the moment. So it's understanding that what history has shown us, both personal and as a people and as a world, is that most things pass and some kind of equilibrium is reestablished, both in your personal life and in the world around you. But that doesn't for 1 minute allay the anxiety and the fears that are there for that person at the time, because logic goes out the window. So it's a matter of working through it. And as Danielle was saying, having powerful distractions, I like the word powerful, is very, very powerful. That we do need to find ways to do things, one which takes us away from being involved in those activities which reinforce our anxiety and our stress, but also which reinforce our understanding that there is so much beauty in the world, that there's so much goodness in the world. So it's going towards activities that can just put a glimpse of light. It could be the find that crack that Leonard Cohen sang so beautifully about and let the light come in.
And could I ask you what you're doing to achieve that crack so the light comes in? How are you managing it yourself, if you don't mind me asking that question?
Well, I think mainly it has to do with reaching out to family and friends and going outdoors and looking around me, noticing the world around me, looking up at the sky and seeing the beauty of the sky. And that's going to continue. And at this point in time, I'm a part of it, and I'm privileged to be able to do it.
I want to ask you one more thing, if I may, and then we'll go to questions. But you gave such a vivid sense of the distress that people feel, with flames above and flames below. And I know one of your suggestions is pause when triggered. Yes. Could you explain that and then what you do after you've paused? Why pause and then what next?
It's we tend always, when we're triggered, to react immediately. So we shoot from the hip. So if we can somehow step back from it, so it's not to deny that trigger, it's a matter of, okay, can I step back from it and view it even for a split second in a different way? And if I can bring that pause in, I have an opportunity to breathe, and then I can say, okay, what really is happening in this moment? And how can I relate to that in a different way? Can I find a way to respond to it in a quieter, more considered manner, rather than just go straight into fight or flight?
And is the reason not to just scream that it goes back to the points raised earlier by Karen Spielman and also Danielle Einstein, that there's uncertainty about how long this waves of trauma, this compounding trauma, is going to keep happening. Therefore, sustainability of one's emotional well-being is sort of a personal and a community concern.
Yes. And it's a community concern. I think you're 100% right. It's both a personal and a community concern, because most people are too young to have experienced 1973. I experienced it personally. I was in the reserves in Israel, so I was on the Golan Heights for 3 weeks. So I understand where that comes from. However, I think that the younger generation today who feel this the fact that Israel, when they were led to believe that Israel was always all-powerful, and when Israel was caught off guard, they, for the first time, saw, well, actually, the bastion or the last resort, if we need it, is not as certain as we thought it was. And I think that it's then coming back and explaining that, well, you know, exactly the same thing happened, or not the same thing, but a similar type of threat happened in 1973. And in terms of the existential threat, it was much, much greater, because even though this was totally horrific, it's not the same level of existential threat. So it's how can we put that aside? But even if you do think that, and you fear that something like that might happen, Israel managed to overcome forces that were so much greater than itself back in 1973, and continue to build the amazing society that exists.
And we've had a number of people requesting us to boost your volume. I'm informed we can't technically boost your volume, so I would ask you to speak up if you could. But just because I always believe we want to be comprehensible to anyone who's joined us who may not know the history. Remind me, 1973. That's the Yom Kippur War, isn't it? Is that what we're referring to there?
Yes.
So a huge multi-enemy threat that caught Israel off guard, but where you were able to ultimately triumph.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you to everyone who's joined us. As you can see, our panel members, Dr. Karen Spielman, an experienced mental health general practitioner, Des Kahn, a psychotherapist in private practice with great experience in grief and loss, and Dr. Danielle Einstein, a clinical psychologist, author and researcher, are our panel. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Lena Safro, another experienced general practitioner who's monitoring your questions received before and after tonight, and she's going to bring some questions to the audience. So welcome, please, Lena, to our webinar.
Thank you, Julie. So our first question tonight is a difficult one, from someone who identifies on a personal level with what the victims went through in Israel, and imagining it could have been herself or her own child. And she would like to know what she can do to help manage that.
That is a very, very big question, and I'll ask might get something from each of you. May I start with you, Dr. Spielman?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm very sorry for that feeling. It's a very, very intense one, and a very, very frightening one. And I imagine an all-encompassing one. So I think probably first and foremost, encourage you to speak to somebody individually about it, so that you can get a really beautiful therapeutic connection to manage that, because I can imagine how challenging that is. And we know that our brains very much feel things when we go through trauma as if it's happening now. And I think, just to relate back to what we said before, Julie, about intergenerational trauma, we get that as well. But we have very powerful physical emotions. I know I say physical emotions, but I'm thinking of our limbic system, which is the part of our brain that feels fear, and make, when we feel unsafe, that's how we feel in our bodies. With our heart races, we feel like we're in danger. Our concentration is very focused. We can't eat. We're quite literally fearing for our lives, and I think that can very much be triggered when you've had an experience that is, it feels like it's happening now. And so it's even more important to go through all the things that we do to make you feel safe. So one of the things that I like to talk through with my patients, a very, very simple strategy, is to tell yourself that you're safe now in the moment. And that helps you to bring down those really intense feelings. And Julie, if it's appropriate now, I can just talk you through how to do that in the moment, because it's actually quite simple. So if you can tell yourself that you're safe right now, you can make sure that you're sitting comfortably in your chair. You can feel your feet on the ground. Use all your senses to show yourself that where you are now is not where your brain has gone to with previous traumas, but that you're here now. For example, in my consulting room, you can see the four walls around you. You can hear the sounds of the people walking in the corridor. You can hear my voice. You can feel your legs on the chair and your feet on the ground. And very simply, a very simple mindful technique that shows you that you're safe now. In that moment, we can connect and we can look at some strategies to try and keep you more grounded for more often. One of the resources that I've sent which hopefully you'll get a little bit later, is called the Healthy Mind Platter, which is developed by an American neuropsychiatrist, Dr. Dan Siegel. And he talks about the 7 essential activities for healthy brain function. And it's very much aimed at telling your body that you're safe now. You're eating reasonably, you're sleeping reasonably, you're connecting, you've got time to focus, you do some counseling, you do some pleasurable movement in your body. And that brings us down into that moment where we're safe now, and then to be able to access somebody that you can process those feelings with in a really therapeutic way. I hope that answers.
Karen Spielman, thank you so much for that. And just if someone is watching this and they don't have a prior relationship, I'm assuming going to your general practitioner is the first step for an appropriate referral if needed.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you don't have a GP that you have a relationship with, ask friends, look around. There are different GPs who are good at different things. So it's important to go to somebody who is able to help you with that. Yeah.
Just before, I'll come to Des if I may in a moment, but just before I do, I think the extraordinary sadistic sexual savagery to women and children has deeply traumatized people who, particularly women, who don't have a prior sexual assault experience of their own. Some of that imagery, and I'm not going to even describe it orally, that was repeatedly on our screens was of the highest order. So it could well be there are people who need, or who should seek one-on-one help just because they can't get that image out of their head. Would that be the sort of symptom that I'd be asked to help?
Oh, absolutely. And exactly, that's that really intrusive. And it is a really visceral thing. It is a very physical memory or imagery. And that is how our bodies deal with traumatic events, but it's also something that we know how to manage. So we can help with those strategies. It is like our brains exist to be on alert, but they also have a balancing nervous system to bring us back down into safety. So technically it's the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So we're built to be able to come down out of those really fearful moments.
Look, thank you. If I could come to Des Kahn, our psychotherapist in private practice, is there something you would add to this woman who's asked this question before I go to another question? Any thoughts you'd like to add?
No, I don't have much to add. I think Karen has expressed very beautifully. Karen has expressed very beautifully the approach, and first and foremost, to seek help. I think this is, if you are overwhelmed, this is a perfect example of where the pause comes in. And I suggest often to my clients, do it physically. Put your hand out and say, pause. And in that moment, just give yourself that moment of respite and say, acknowledge. You're not denying that you feel that way. You say, I see you. And then you ask yourself, but what is happening now? Is this happening now, in the here and now, in the present moment? No, but I have this deep fear and I don't know what to do with it. So I'm going to go and seek help from somebody who can help me work through it.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go now to another question so we get more from our audience. If Lena Safra could come back to us, please.
Well, there are some very difficult questions to answer, but I think that do deserve addressing. A couple of people have written that they have ended relationships with long-standing friends who have been expressing anti-Semitic and anti-Israel views in the last few weeks. And people want to know, how do you deal emotionally with that kind of loss and with anti-Semitism as such?
Wow, that's a hard one, isn't it? Now, I'm just remembering, I'm asking us all to remember that the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies are doing another webinar tomorrow night that's going to look at the war and anti-Semitism in the community. And our focus tonight is more at the personal level. It's a narrow distinction, isn't it? But it's there. But may I come to you first, Danielle, for your thoughts there on, if you could turn your mic on, please, the emotional management of the distress of a friendship fracturing, because there just doesn't seem to be sufficient understanding or actual anti-Semitism.
Yeah, well, and that is the case, that the person or the people that have written that have experienced that and see that and feel so strongly and understandably, may have severed the connections. And I think we can only sort of think about how we deal with friendship breakups normally, which is there's a huge amount of grief involved in that. There's a lot of loss because our friends contribute to our lives and we contribute to theirs. So it's so important to have, and this is where I think it's very important that we have one-on-one discussions with other friends who are supportive. And I think that's important to consider, and not in necessarily social media groups, but going and talking to a trusted other friend who gives you good advice, talking to multiple trusted other friends, but one-on-one, where you're being listened to, where you're talking about the sadness, the loss, the surprise, and or the disgust, or whatever the feelings are.
Yes. Because I'm just thinking, Danielle, this will be a time, and I know we're going to talk about adolescents and children at our next webinar in this series, but there will be people even in their 20s at university who are discovering for the first time degrees of anti-Semitism that they didn't feel still existed. And there may be topics that are absolutely shocking to them, that are the views that some of their friends are holding. And this must just be immensely difficult to deal with.
I think the other part to think about, Julie, is that sometimes sometimes it's definitely there, and other times I've seen that it's been interpreted as though it's there when it wasn't there. And for instance, someone not reaching out or someone saying, I don't want to express an opinion, has been interpreted as though that means that the person is against Israel. I was talking to the Commissioner for Children a couple of weeks ago. I was on a panel with her, and I asked her as we were walking there, because I think it's my job to open the discussion with every single person I meet. And I said, well, what's your view? What's happening? And she explained to me that because she represents 4 million children in New South Wales, she can't take a public view of it, and she has to ensure that everybody is supported. And I think sometimes we forget that that's actually a potentially legitimate stand, because it's a very complicated situation out there, and there would be some people that we need. So I guess on the one hand, we need the support for grieving a loss of a friendship. On the other hand, we need to make sure we're not jumping to a conclusion and not shutting down a conversation, because many people I've spoken to who might have started with a negative slant, I've then been able to talk to them about my concerns and worries and my Israeli friends who are in a terrible situation, and then find out more about what they think and why it is. And then slowly sort of step them, not expecting to get it all in one conversation either. Being willing to take several and being willing to spend time with them one-on-one, and sort of seeing this as a strategic, building of an understanding about very complex Middle Eastern politics, very long-standing history, and get them to understand that the propaganda and the words that we're seeing, which are so frightening for all of us, understand why they're frightening for us and why we don't feel they're legitimate. But that has to, it takes time, and it takes one-on-one. I think it takes one-on-one slow conversations, not.
Yes, and that point's been made very strongly, the importance of the one-on-one contact. And I guess what I'd be looking for, and I'll come to Des now, if I may, just to share it in the time, but I guess I'd be looking for a willingness to receive articles or something from the New South Wales Board of Deputies frequently asked questions website, a willingness to open their mind and learn, not like, if I might say, during the recent campaign around the referendum, some people were able to be swayed in their thinking, if they were willing to learn. But if I may come to you, Des, because something Danielle just said reminded me of something I think you'd like to talk about, which is the holding of complexity, that we need to be able to hold seemingly contradictory ideas together in our hearts and minds. Could you just speak to that and how that may help when you're at risk of losing long-term friends?
Yeah, I think that the problem with situations like this, where emotions are very, very high, and partly to do with the media side, but also the reality of what's happening in Gaza itself. So it's a matter of saying to somebody who expressing that kind of view, I don't see an inherent contradiction in my holding both the sadness and the horror of what Hamas did on the 7th of November, and the sadness I feel for the mothers and children that are losing their lives or their homes in Gaza. And it's not getting into a kind of political discussion of rights and wrongs. It's simply saying that as a human being, I can feel the pain from both sides. And can you?
You say things well, Des. Thank you. Could I just come, if I may, to Karen Spielman, because Karen, you've been nodding madly while both Danielle and Des are speaking. And I think this issue of loss of friendship, it's not a small matter. It's not a small matter. So your thoughts, please.
I love both of your words, but I think complexity and holding two truths are such human needs, that it's not an uncommon thing that we do need to hold two truths, and that's part of our superpowers, really, as empathic, interconnected people, that we do understand that there are different ways people see things, and to be able to connect and be empathic. That's what's sadly missing from the toxic polarization that we see in the media. And one of the things that was in my head just listening to both of my colleagues is you can only do what you can only do. Like, we actually have to protect ourselves at this time, and friendships are, the stuff of life, aren't they? The beauty of life. But if they're painful and we're vulnerable, you can only do what you can only do. If you have to let go of a friendship in order to protect your well-being, because you're feeling that that visceral discomfort or distress from that connection, it's not the time to be challenging it. Maybe just to step back and bring yourself back into that more regulated space that we were talking about before, and think, this is something that I'm going to deal with later. When we feel a little bit better, maybe we can reach out and offer a chance to connect around that complexity as well.
And Karen, could one bit of advice be, don't burn all your bridges? That say you need to have a break from the friendship so there's time to reflect. It's just that I feel at the moment I've been astonished at the number of people who are going hashtag free Palestine, hashtag from the river to the sea, people whom I would never have thought could be so grossly ignorant and simplistic and wrong. If I could just nail my colours to the mast for a moment.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a weakling, but I'm avoiding those people rather than telling them I don't want to see them ever again. I just want to let it unfold. That might be the wrong way to take it.
I don't think that is wrong, Julie. I think we're all human, and we can only fight what we can fight. Like I exist in a professional space. I've had colleagues putting out statements that I have written in opposition to, and they haven't written back to me, and there's only so much I can do. So I choose my battles where I might have the most impact, where I think I may be able to impact people in that grey zone. And if you can't, you can't. That's the strength of the community, isn't it? That there are people who are able to take things on, and we don't have to do everything.
Yeah, no, thank you. Lena, Dr. Safra, could you come back with another question from our audience, please?
Sure, Julie. All of these questions are very complex. So here is another complex one. How does one deal with the wish to help Israel at the same time knowing that your impact is limited and the guilt associated with that?
The guilt of only being able to have a limited positive impact.
Correct.
Wow. I'll come to you, Danielle, first, if I may. Your thoughts on that? Just repeat the question one more time, Lena, because it's very profound.
Sure. So it's about balancing a very heartfelt desire to help Israel, at the same time realizing that there isn't very much you can do from here, and the resulting guilt that needs to be dealt with.
Danielle, a first thought from you. We'll get something from each of you.
I suppose my initial thought is the need to break down what it means to help, and that even though we may only be able to help in a very small way, if we can find some purpose that we can do something about. I think there is a lot of guilt. There's a lot of guilt. If you're Israeli and you're not there, there's a lot of guilt, and there's guilt involved, for instance, in not checking and not staying up to date and even having any normalcy. I don't have a full answer. That's just my initial thoughts, Julie.
Oh, thank you. Des, could I come to you, and please push your voice as big as you can, please?
Sure. So I think that that's a very, very difficult one, and yes, I think as time goes on, there will be more opportunities to go there. So I've been, for example, in touch with a couple of organizations, therapeutic organizations, and have offered to do stuff on Zoom, or to go over at some stage and spend maybe a month or two working with people. Because I speak fluent Hebrew, I can add value. But I think that how I deal with my own helplessness here is that I have lots of very close friends in Israel who are now at the stage where some of their grandchildren are in the army. Their children are too old, and they are too old. But that aside, what I do, I have a kind of rotation so that I don't drive them crazy. But every couple of days, I will phone, I will just, how are you guys going? So I reach out to them and let them know that I'm here, that I care, and that I would love to be able to help them in a more concrete way, but to know that I'm here with them in spirit. And I think that that's, probably everybody in the Jewish community in Sydney has somebody or a number of people in Israel who they connected to. So perhaps that might be a way to do it.
And Des, I'm just so you know, and I'm sorry to be repetitive, I'm getting repeated messages that people are asking you to project. I know when I want psychological support, I'm going to come into a room with you, because your gentle manner could not be more perfect for the one-on-one psychotherapeutic encounter. But unfortunately, we often have a lot of people over 70, which I'm approaching myself.
I promise never to become a TV broadcaster.
please project your spiritual and psychological insights. But Karen, I haven't come to you yet, have I? Could I ask you to respond to that?
I would like to share something that one of my beautiful Israeli friends told me very early on, when I think I said something similar to her very early in October. I just felt so helpless. And she told me the most beautiful image, that we are all backing each other up. And she's in Israel, and she and her family are packing boxes and sending things to people taking supplies to the front. And other people are supporting her, and we're calling and thinking of her, and it was just such a beautiful image of the layers of support. So I think we are all holding, we're even just having people in mind. We're all helping that next level. And yeah, of course, we're Jewish, we're born to feel guilty, but that's okay. That's also a superpower, because that's how we get things done. So, from a strength-based point of view, you are caring and thinking, and I think that's so important. And prayer for those who are religious, and thinking, and just those layers of holding those that are closest. That was a beautiful imagery for me.
And Karen, can you tell us, you're involved in a peer support group, which I think is for Jewish doctors. Is that correct? Can you just tell us about that, and how that fits with making a contribution?
Sure. And that was something that I felt that I could do. I've been trained to run what we call peer reflection groups for GPs who do a lot of mental health, but I'm connected to a lot of Jewish doctors. We're all, everybody's in WhatsApp groups to get information and to keep connected. And that was something that I felt I could do to offer Jewish colleagues who were feeling distress around the particulars of their work, caring, how do you care for the carers? And that was something I felt I could do to offer support for Jewish colleagues. So I've just run a couple of groups where we've got together on Zoom and just, had a safe space to discuss how we're managing.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I think I'll go to another question, if I may. I've always got questions, but I think responding to what our audience are bringing is the right way to go this evening, if I may. So, Lena, can I come to you again, please?
Sure. There is another question about balance, actually. So what do you do when you want to be informed about what's going on one hand, and fearing the emotional impact of it, because turning off the news is not really an option. How do you deal with that?
Danielle, can I come to you first? I saw your hand move. So it's this issue of how much to inform oneself through both mainstream media and social media. And, what are your thoughts there?
I think this is such a really difficult one. And the closer you are to what's happening, the more you're connected, the more upset you are, the more you want to look all the time, and you feel like you have to know what's happening as it unfolds. And that's what 24/7 news does for us. But really, we can only make meaning of the day's event after the day has happened. Is my Wi-Fi okay? Is it working?
It is fluctuating, but we can see and hear you. It's not normal, but it's good enough.
Okay. So I think the first thing is to recognize that it's in negative situations, in positive situations, or when we don't know what we're about to see, we sort of reach for the news to give us a lift in our mood. Now, that's not what's happening here. We're not looking for a lift in our news. It's more that we feel obliged and so fearful that we want to know what's happening all the time. And yet, when you really think about what's happening all the time, nothing is happening every second. Nothing is happening 1 minute, the next minute, hopefully, except on a particularly bad day. Mostly, we can get the news once a day and look back and then understand and make meaning, and hopefully watch it with others around us if there's anyone that we're living with, or have a conversation with other people, not straight on social media, but actually a verbal discussion or a phone call to digest what we've seen and make meaning of it. But we're in this situation of uncertainty where it's going to keep unfolding, and there's this desperation to see it. But it's like with any sort of anxiety where we want to check straight away, and we know with actual anxiety disorders or that we're helping people with, there's this need to know as much as I can all the time. And actually that drives anxiety. It actually makes it worse.
Okay, I'm just doing this colloquially as in terms of someone I was very close to who had very serious problems with anxiety. Checking behaviors of various kinds were part of that disorder. So for people who are vulnerable to anxiety conditions, it's a very difficult time. I want to come to our other panelists, but let me just ask you one more thing. When we spoke before tonight, you said a really good, important message is to stay with trusted sources when you're dealing with the media. And golly, I thought to myself, and I say this with great personal pain because, as some people would know, I did work at the ABC for over 25 years. I have worked at SBS at times. I don't know where the trusted sources are. What I'm currently doing is I subscribe to 3 newspapers from Israel who all have a slightly different perspective, and that's probably as trusting as I get, plus some individuals whom I know are well informed, and I go to them. But I guess I'm restricting my access to mainstream and social media for rational reasons, if I could, not that I'm saying anyone else is irrational. But your thoughts there, I mean, is there anything we truly trust anymore?
Well, I think the Jewish Board of Deputies is a great resource, and tomorrow night I hope that we'll hear more about what to look to. So I'd be looking to them, and I know we have great thinkers who are telling us and guiding us along the way in the community.
Yes, I'm going to say for people who've joined us who perhaps didn't hear Richard Glass earlier, the Vice President of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies who's spoken, also the President of Wolper Jewish Hospital, the Israel at War Resources and Information is currently on a website. The address is www. Of course, but nswjbd.org.au. You have to put that AU on the end to get it. And there's information there, including frequently asked questions lots of constant updating. So I think that's just such an important thing to remind people as a trusted source. But could I come to you, Karen Spielman, in terms of this management of information? Your thoughts there?
I think I'd have to go back to my earlier comments about recognizing distress in our bodies. And that's a way of understanding when it's too much, and it's going to be different for everybody. It's probably going to be different for each person, depending on the day as well. I know some days I'm obsessed and completely absorbed, and some days I'm much better at coming in and out, and some days I'm distracted. So recognizing when it's too much is around those physical symptoms of distress. So this, like I've said before, the sleeplessness, the palpitations, the appetite problems, the neck pain, the headaches. That's a way of understanding that the adrenaline, the sympathetic overdrive is too much, and the worry is too much, in the same way that we recognize anxiety and intrusive thinking, and we have skills to bring that back down. I think with social media, there are some really good things about it in terms of connection. We've talked about the difficult things, but it's really important to know how to, to have the beginning, the middle, and the end, to be able to set some limits and to recognize when that's okay and not okay.
Look, thank you. Could I just say, someone is sending me messages, and if you could just put your name on the end. I'm not sure what the initials stand for, just to help me with that. But could I come to you, Des, on this issue of when is too much information too overstimulating and destructive? I'm also aware that many of us are on international time zones. Do you know what I mean? And that can be so disruptive. But do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that that Danielle and I think that Danielle and Karen have actually said what needs to be said, both from how it impacts us physically and emotionally, but also how to find a way just to regulate the amount of time that we devote to it. I think that one thing which I would suggest, and I had to teach myself this, is analyze which I believe to be the trusted sources, rather than going to a whole panoply of sources, and not to go to them one after the other. So, okay, now I'm going to look at the New York Times. At lunchtime, I look at the Herald. At tea time, I look at Haaretz, etc. Because what I realized that the reason I was flicking from one to the other, because I was looking for the channel or the media that would give me good news. So and that was the real reason I was doing it, not because it was going to tell me anything different. Maybe here they'll say the hostages are being released. Maybe here they'll say they've come to some kind of agreement.
And could I come back to that issue that I think Danielle raised, the importance of sharing positive stories and not thinking it's weak. Like, for example, for me, Project Rosanna is a group that I follow closely because of the work they do, bringing together Palestinian health professionals and Israeli or Arabic health professionals. Israeli health professionals are Jewish and different groups, and they do joint training. And that gives me a sense of hope that those one-on-one relationships, as Danielle has kept emphasizing, will somehow survive the trauma of this experience. Can I just say, I can see, Danielle, you want to say something. If you could be quick, because I now realize Lena is going to share with us some of the suggestions coming from the audience about helping Israel and assuaging guilt. But let me come, if I may, first to you, Danielle Einstein. Thank you.
I was just going to add to what Des was saying, that there is this element where you're looking, if you're looking at breakfast, looking at lunch, looking at dinner, that just before you look, you actually do get a bit of a dopamine hit because dopamine comes when you don't know what you're about to see. So it's that little bit of hope that gives you the dopamine hit that makes you reach to check on that new media. And so we need to recognize there is actually an addictive element in this. And then our mood goes right down and crashes when there's no good news or the news or we don't like, and then we end up looking for something else to try and get another lift in our mood. So that is actually happening.
It's almost like if you're monitoring yourself and you're very distressed regularly or hypervigilant or stirred up, you need to have an actual plan for viewing and times and stick to it, like a self-protective schedule. But let me invite Dr. Lena Safro, who's been monitoring your comments and questions and recommendations from the audience. Thank you, Lena.
Sure, we've got some excellent practical suggestions on how we can actually make a real impact and to help Israel. And that would include fundraising, donating money, knitting beanies for the IDF. There are a few excellent organizations doing very practical on-the-ground work, such as Operation Golda, for example, assisting Israeli families, especially families with small children who are here traumatized, needing support in every way. An organization that I know well, for example, Our Big Kitchen, they've been baking cookies and people have been taking it around to the local police stations to say thank you to police for doing a good job for, to protect the Jewish population.
That's here in Australia?
Here in Sydney.
Okay.
So there are lots of practical ways to do things that make an impact and make us feel good at the same time.
Thank you. And look, I won't comment. I think it's better if I come to yourselves. So let's try and get 2 more quick questions, guys. I think maybe we should be able to do that. Lena, another question, please.
Maybe just to get back from complex questions about balance and to something a little bit more practical. People want to know how to get back to sleep when you wake up with obsessive thoughts about what's going on.
Wow, can I just quickly say we did a whole webinar on sleep. It was our last webinar. If you go to the Wolper Jewish Hospital website and go to the forums, there was some really expert people talking about sleep there. But let me come to our general practitioner, Dr. Karen Spielman. Intrusive thoughts at night, what can we do?
You're right, Julie. It's a long consultation, but a very common one. There are some terrific handouts about sleep. I would recommend, if you want to Google the Centre for Clinical CCI.org.au has a great handout on sleep strategies. But distraction is a really important one. Not getting too worried about not being able to go back to sleep, having a list of things that you can do, get rid of the things that you're worried about, maybe write a little list. My favorite is podcasts, and there's a fantastic app called Insight Timer that I often recommend to my patients, which if you go onto that, has some really terrific strategies and different things to listen to just get your mind off the intrusive thoughts. Recognize that it's very common, and there are some really good ways to deal with it. Or come and see your GP and have a consultation about all the other things that could contribute.
Could I come to you, Des Kahn, as well? Because in your work as a grief and loss counsellor, you must have dealt with people one-on-one who are lying awake with intrusive thoughts. What are your thoughts there?
It's so varied. People have very specific ways in which they could do it. So I would say, first and foremost, in this situation, don't go to your phone. Let it be. And if you've got the courage, also disconnect your Wi-Fi before you go to bed. But it's there, and you've had the sleep seminar, and there's so many different strategies. For some people, it helps just to get up and make a nice cup of herbal tea and then go back to bed, and or it can be picking up their book and reading another chapter and falling asleep, or it can be picking up their sleep journal or their journal and quickly noting what was going on for them, not only in terms of remembering the dream that might have triggered it, but just simply expressing their fears And what you're doing is you're externalizing it. And externalization is the most important thing you can do, because you're getting it out of your body and you're moving it into somewhere which is out there in front of you.
Just ask you, Des, when we spoke before tonight, you talked about dropping anchor as a way of a practical self-care. It's not directly linked to sleep, but what do you mean by dropping anchor, and how do you do it?
It's a system which was devised by Russ Harris, who is an Australian therapist, who is part of the Acceptance and Commitment Therapy School. And what he says, simply said, if you're a ship in a storm, you can't blow the storm away, because the storm is more powerful than you. So you have to find a way not to land up on the rocks. So you drop anchor. Now you're still going to be buffered about by the waves, but you'll survive the storm. So it's the process is simply acknowledging what's going on for you, not denying it, and then connecting back to your body and becoming grounded. And he offers a whole lot of different techniques, and you can devise your own techniques for doing that. And then you engage once again with your life. What is it that I wanted to do? Yes, I've got to finish baking that cake. I've got work assignments which I need to do. And so once you've dropped that anchor, you're giving yourself the space to re-engage with living.
Oh, thank you so much. That is just so interesting.
I've sent the title of the book to which Michelle will send in the email.
Yes, and I do need to let you know, a number of people have asked if we could share the link to tomorrow night's Jewish Board of Deputies webinar that is starting at 7 p.m. Sydney time. So again, I will pass that on to the Wolper Jewish Hospital Group and commend to you again the website of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies. I'll do that in a moment. I'd like to try and answer one more question, if I may. Lena, can you hit us with one more question, please?
Oh, Julie, I think there is one that was asked more than once, which will segue nicely into our next webinar. People are very concerned about what are the things you should be saying to your children and what are the coping mechanisms to make sure they're truthful and provide the right information and are helpful, but not scaring the children. So,
look, thank you. Can I just say, I'm going to come to you, Karen Spielman, if I may, just because, look, one of my stepdaughter was a general practitioner for a while, so was one of my brothers, and I know there isn't a life problem that doesn't come to you on a regular basis. But I do want to alert our audience that we will be having on Monday, the 4th of December, at 7:30 Australian Eastern Daylight Time, so 7:30 Sydney time. I think, yes, it's coming up on the screen now. Our second in this particular series, looking at mental health and well-being. Monday, the 4th of December, we will be focusing specifically on caring for children and adolescents, and the messages will be offered to parents and grandparents and carers. So we're still expecting primarily an adult audience. If you were able to take that away now, Nat, so that I can just see the face of Karen. I just got slightly distracted, but you were saying some more there. Yes, the question, if you could have a go at that question, please.
Sure. And
just
again,
some people won't be there on the 4th.
Yeah, I'm just thinking just a very, very quick answer to that. I think there would be two things I'd say. One is to be very careful about the developmental level of the child that you're speaking with, and to be very careful to pitch the information in a way that is appropriate for that age. And if you're not sure, I would seek advice or help before you had that conversation. And secondly, again, one of the sayings I always say to my families and patients is, children are barometers. They pick things up and they imagine the worst. So they will sense that something's going on. There is no point hiding it. I think secrets are toxic. I think you can't pretend that things are okay if they're not okay. But to be able to target the information in a very simple, direct way, and to let them know that they are safe, to be very mindful that they will relate everything to themselves, specifically small children, and to be very, very clear about their safety, and that you're there to look after them, and that's your job, to look after your kids.
I'm a grandmother now, very involved with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I observe with their parents and indeed with their grandparents that I feel like our job is to stay steady and emotionally regulated,
Yes.
and have our freakouts elsewhere.
Yes.
Because otherwise children often think they're in trouble. If we look distressed, or we look, and I happen to be in the presence of small children when the planes flew into the towers in New York, and I was with a mother and she said, "Steady, Julie, just hold it in till the children have left the room." And I always remember that, because in a sense, it's terribly hard to do, but necessary. Look, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a great believer in finishing on time. So I do want to just remind you that this webinar is recorded and will be up on the the Wolper Jewish Hospital website in a couple of days. We have had a query as to whether tomorrow night's webinar, that is run by the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies at 7 p.m, will it be recorded? I'm sorry, I don't know, but I would urge you to go to their website, and I'm sure answers will be there. And perhaps we can ask the Wolper team to, as well as circulating information about it, to answer that question as to whether it will be recorded. But right now, on behalf of all of you in the audience tonight, the warmest possible congratulations and gratitude to Dr. Karen Spielman, our general practitioner, Des Kahn, our psychotherapist in private practice, and Dr. Danielle Einstein, clinical psychologist, author and researcher. A sincere thank you for having some of the most serious questions I've ever heard asked and answering it with maturity and steadiness. I'd also like to remind our audience that you will be emailed a survey for your frank, anonymous feedback. Please answer it, because it guides the team in what they do. And also, yes, you could go to the Wolper website to see this particular webinar. And that final reminder that part 2 of this series from Wolper Jewish Hospital, protecting our mental health in this time of crisis, with a focus on helping children and adolescents, that is Monday, the 4th of December at 7:30 p.m. So this is deaf sign clapping. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you and good night.